get started, thank you all for being here for the next installment of our Student Development Seminar Series. We're very excited for today's topic. We have almost Dr. Kayla Loper. And I will be talking about sense of belonging, which is Kayla's dissertation research. And so lots of good information. Kayla's going to talk a lot about the theoretical foundations and underpinnings behind sense of belonging, and then I'm going to talk about some of the more practical applications. So we'll have time for questions at the end. So I will turn it over to Kayla.
Awesome, thank you. So quick disclaimer, this is the first presentation I've done where I get to put ABD, so I just passed my dissertation proposal the first week of class this semester, so I'm about to start collecting data, which is really exciting. So I think it's important that I explain which PhD program I'm in because it kind of helps describe what I'm doing for my dissertation. So I'm in the REMS program here on campus in the College of Education and Human Sciences, which is a part of the educational psychology program, mostly because there's not enough of us to have our own program, so we have to hop onto someone else's. So basically all the classes that I've taken are all the data analysis classes, as well as a handful of some of the ed psych classes, and then my cognate's higher education. So my focus is data analysis applied to higher education. Since this is the program that I'm in, I have to do a kind of a specific type of dissertation. So I either have to do a really in-depth analysis of something or develop and investigate some different type of analysis or create a new measurement instrument. And I'm very much a practitioner type person, so I chose to create a new measurement instrument, and I'm creating one on sense of belonging. So you get to hear a little bit about my literature review today, which is the best chapter of a dissertation, but hopefully I'll make it interesting and not the boring process I went through to get here today. So sense of belonging, I think it's really important to understand the definition. So I threw a few of the most popular ones up here on the slide. Goodnow is probably the most popular definition that is used, just I guess in research. But Goodnow does have their own measurement instrument of sense of belonging, but it's very K through 12. So keep in mind that it can be used for anything. It's adapted a lot to different situations, but it originally was created for the K through 12 setting. So the definition, the extent to which students feel personally accepted, respected, included, and supported by others in the school environment. The words that stood out to me in this definition is the word extent. As a REMS person, that's a really exciting word to see because that means I can measure it. So I can say there's some type of spectrum, I can figure out where you're at on if you have a low or high level of sense of belonging. And then of course these words accepted, respected, included, and supported are the words that we're trying to help our students feel these things. Just kind of gives us a good understanding of what belonging means. ANANT is an older definition, but I think has some good keywords in here. And you do see ANANT's work referenced a lot throughout research. Sense of belonging characterizes a person's perceived belief of indispensability within a system. So the words that stand out to me in this one, perceived belief. I think that's really interesting because I cannot tell you what your sense of belonging is. Only you can. It's a feeling. It can change every day. So that's hard to measure, but I think it's important to understand that when you're thinking a sense of belonging is you can try as hard as possible to make someone else feel like they belong, but it's up to them to tell you if they belong or not. It's their personal perceived belief if they do. This word indispensability, I think is a really strong word. Essentially, your system or your organization couldn't operate if this person wasn't there. So that, I think, also helps describe what that feeling is like, I matter here. If I wasn't here, it would also matter to this organization and the system to function. So, and then of course you see system and environment are in this definition too. So it's part of a whole. Our campus is what we often talk about, but it can be part of your student organization, part of your office environment, whatever it is that you're working in. Hagerty and Petoskey is a much more higher ed definition. They have their own measurement instrument that is applied to higher ed, so I always include them, but they have a lot of these same words. So you see personal involvement, it's a very personal experience, there's the system or environment, and that they're integral part, so that's kind of referencing this indispensability. So wanted to make sure I threw a higher ed person on there too. Strayhorn is someone you guys may have heard of. He has a really great book about sense of belonging that I highly recommend picking up if you're interested in reading more about it. But he has the 7 core elements of sense of belonging, which honestly, again, is kind of what I'm doing today. It's, I think, kind of this consensus of literature and everything coming together. These are the 7 core things that he has found in his research. So you see a lot of the same kind of words, but I think some of the things that really stand out to me in Strayhorn's is, we'll talk a little bit about it being a human need on the next slide, as well as it gives you a motive or gives you motivation, and it affects the behavior that you do. So if you belong, your behavior is affected, it gives you motivation. It depends, I mentioned earlier that it's this personal, fluid kind of thing. So it depends on the context, time, and factors. So this week you might be having a good week and people are being really nice to you and you feel like you belong this week. And next week, it seems like everybody hates you, and so you don't feel like you belong as much. So it really depends on when I give somebody this measurement instrument, or when you're talking with a student, what's going on in their lives, where they're at, maybe even what time of day it is. This next one, very similar words that we've seen. It's related to the feeling one matters, they're valued, appreciated. We've talked a little bit about that. One thing Strayhorn does do a lot of good work on is talking about belonging in reference to identity work. So it's connected to your identities. Do you see yourself reflected in the other people that you're around? Your identities often can predict your level of sense of belonging and the identities of the, I guess, overwhelming part of your organization. So it's really important to be asking those questions and kind of checking in on that piece when it comes to sense of belonging. When you have higher levels of sense of belonging, good things happen. So it is a positive outcome. It's something that we should care about. And that's been proven through tons and tons of research. And then it also, this one kind of reiterates the changing piece. So it's always continuously changing. It's not something you can be like, I helped a student find where they belong and I'm done. Like, I don't need to do anything, or they don't need to continuously be supported. So it's one of those things that we're always thinking about, always helping students achieve. Okay, let's throw some theory in there. So my hope is that most of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's one of the most basic motivation theories that we have. And it's actually, Maslow is the first time that we see the word belonging start showing up in research. So kind of interesting to me that that's where the word started being used, I guess. So thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so these 3 layers, they operate in a deficit. And these are your first, so they build upon each other. You have to have food and water and air to breathe in order to start thinking about these, correct? So these 3, you have motivation when you don't have these things. So if I don't have food, I'm hangry, so I'm gonna go find food, hopefully, or I need someone else to find it for me. And then next comes safety. But thinking about belonging, I think it's interesting. If I do not belong somewhere, I'm going to go out and find somewhere that I can belong. And that is what my motivation is going to be. And I can't even probably focus on these things until I have met this need. I think that an easy way to think about this is probably in a lot of dating lives. Like, you want to find your partner and you really want to belong, and so you keep going out and trying to find them. And that's a need that you're wanting. You're wanting to maybe establish your own family. So I think that, and I know for me, it could get in the way of me being able to focus on some of my self-esteem, or what does my future look like, because I want to find my home unit, where do I belong? So maybe a not higher ed example to think about how that pertains. Now these 4 levels, you are motivated the more you get of it. So they don't necessarily operate in a deficit. They operate, the more esteem that you build, you are motivated to continue finding it because it feels good, and you want to continue learning that. So we have cognitive needs. These are kind of our main goals of higher education. Cognitive, obviously going to class, gaining more knowledge. The more knowledge you gain, the more you want. If you start to crave it, you're motivated to continue finding it. So I think also the esteem and respect of others. So we talk a lot, I think this kind of hits our DEI pillars that we're always talking about, wanting to do that. Self-actualization, realizing your full potential. I think a lot about that career placement. What does my future look like? These are all of our goals in higher education, but students can't even start being motivated to do these things if they don't first feel like they belong somewhere. Any questions about Mass Close? So thinking about my research, I was interested in finding out how students define their sense of belonging. So these definitions talked a lot about that it's personal, that it's what they perceive as their sense of belonging. And all the definitions and research I was finding and measurement tools all has to do with their experience inside the classroom. And as a student affairs pro, I was like, no, I know what I do matters. I know what I do makes a difference in their belonging. And I want to be able to measure that and prove that. So I did a pilot study, and I'll actually be duplicating this as my first phase of my research. And I say my assessment committee also helped me. There's a few of them in the room. So we did a pilot study, and we administered a really short survey to our Leadership and Campus Life leaders. And basically we asked them 2 questions. We asked them, what are 10 words that come to mind when you think about your belonging at Oklahoma State University? And then we asked them what programs they're involved in. And they could check from a list. We made a pretty comprehensive list so they could check all that apply. So these are the results of that pilot study. And I think they're really interesting. So we did a simple count. I think the words that you would expect to come up are the most frequently used words. Friends, family, home, community, something cowboy related, inclusion. They maybe mentioned a specific org. So this wasn't very surprising. But when we started to sort the words more into themes, different categories, I think that's where some of this interesting information that maybe we haven't thought about before comes to light. So one of the things that first stood out to me is that there were some words in the responses that the word itself wasn't negative, but it was often paired with a negative word in their list of 10 words. So one response I can think of that really stood out in the combination of words was white, preppy, fake diversity. So the term white by itself isn't necessarily a negative word, so I would not have sorted it in negative wording, but paired with preppy and fake diversity, I decided to interpret that as this is probably more like a stereotype, like maybe the student themselves doesn't feel like they belong, but if I were to describe the people who do belong, this is how I would describe them. And that's how they chose to interpret the question. So I think that's one of the interesting pieces of it is the question is a little bit up for interpretation, but you get some interesting data. So we did have a good handful of words that, for whatever reason, the way they were combined with other words, we put in a category of stereotypes of someone that belongs, which I think was very enlightening. There were negative wording, which you would expect in any type of very personal survey. A lot of people talked about relationships, their friendships, family, just those kind of tough words. But I think some of the things that maybe these are kind of repetitive of here. But I thought it was interesting that we have having something in common, so they feel like they belong when maybe we all, my group has all the same political beliefs, so we have something in common that brings us together. But then we also had people that were saying, I feel like I belong when differences come together. So I feel like I belong when we have accepted all these different types of people to be part of this one group. So in my mind, those things might kind of contradict each other, but our students are saying that they feel like they belong in both those types of settings. So it's possible we need to offer both of those types of settings so that everybody kind of finds that way that they belong. I also thought it was interesting, we had some people say like laptop or just these physical items. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, I feel like I belong because I have a laptop and everybody else here has a laptop. And so is it possible that our students who can't afford a laptop don't feel like they belong because everybody else has a laptop? Seems really basic, but it mattered enough to the students who reported these physical things impacting their belonging that they turned it in on the survey. So I thought that was interesting as well. And then I think these others, I would expect to probably see that I belong because I'm involved in my Greek organization, or I belong. I want to be part of something bigger, maybe this like grand plan, or just like impacting, making a difference on campus. And then occasions, like we'd see things like homecoming or just different traditions that we would see here at OSU. So one thing that was especially enlightening though is rarely, I think there were like, I mean you can see they're not on here, the classroom was very rarely brought up. So maybe one or two people said faculty. It just didn't happen that often. So I actually got this survey design from a dissertation that was done in the United Kingdom, and she found kind of the same thing, is that when you ask a student, like, how do you define belonging, they might mention the classroom, but they're also going to talk about going to the bars on the Strip and the things they do in their free time and all these other things that we probably need to do a little bit better of measuring and investigating what that means to them. So I decided to do it here and see if students in the United States would kind of report the same thing. And I'm doing my dissertation, so we'll see what happens. But I think they're going to report the same thing. So ultimately, my goal is to define student sense of belonging from the student perspective and not this psychological research perspective. And then I'm going to create a measurement instrument from the student perspective to measure sense of belonging. So it's not just going to be, do you feel like your professors listen to you? Do you feel like your peers allow you to talk in class? It'll be more than that. So that's the goal. And that's all I have.
Awesome. I'm very thankful for Kayla's work. It's really helped illuminate a lot of what we are trying to do. She said, we were talking earlier, she's like, I feel like this is all I talk about right now. And I was like, yes, and please keep talking, because I'm learning a ton. So what we want to talk about now is how we build this, so how we provide this for students. I think one of the most important things that we see from sense of belonging, just like Kayla said, I can tell you you belong, that doesn't matter, right? I have to feel it. You have to feel that you belong. You have to see demonstrable evidence that you belong in order for it to actually be effective. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we might build some of those things. And so this is right out of Strayhorn, right? It's related to the feeling that one matters, is valued, or appreciated by others. I have to internalize this. I have to feel it in order for that to happen. So one of the ways I think that we see a lot of sense of belonging come about is through traditions and rituals. Things that I can participate in that lets me know I am a part of this group. I am a part of this organization. You know, I think one of the areas that we think of as providing a really strong sense of belonging for our students, obviously, is in our fraternity and sorority community, right? Those students who are members of fraternities and sororities tend to really feel that they belong to those organizations. Well, part of that is because there are literal rituals that they go through that says you belong, right? You have crossed over this experience from somebody who is not part of this group to now somebody who is inside this group. You have our secrets, you have our rituals. You literally know the secret handshake, right? So you know that you belong. But so we've built that so strongly into the fraternity and sorority community. But there are traditions and there are rituals that we have as an institution that are open to anybody that can communicate that you belong. I think about things like Camp Cowboy, right? There are traditions and there are rituals that happen at camp that you experience that set you apart from somebody who has not had that experience, that you can draw on, that you can rely on to feel like you belong. There are traditions here on campus that anybody can participate in to help them feel like I belong in this space. I also think about this at the individual organizational level. So, sorry, my glass, masks and glasses and all that. For instance, I'm part of the Office of Leadership and Campus Life. One of the things that we love in Leadership and Campus Life, when we can, are potlucks, right? Like, we love a good potluck in Leadership and Campus Life. Well, that is a tradition. That is something that we gather together around, and we have stories of who has brought what, and what meals were really successful, and what maybe weren't so successful at times, right? But these traditions that we can gather around, these shared experiences that we have had that help us know, okay, I belong. And this is a way we communicate to new staff, right? New folks who join our organization, we celebrate them coming in with a potluck. If you are one of us now, you're expected to bring food. But that just communicates you are a part of this tradition for us. And so I think about the more that we can ritualize, traditionalize some of these things that we're doing, the more it helps build that sense of belonging for folks. Heroes and stories go a long way towards building a sense of tradition. If you have not, so Kayla did a great job again, of citing her work earlier. I did not do such a good job. But a lot of my stuff around organizational development comes from Bowman and Deal, the 4 frames. You know, a lot of you are probably familiar with that through your own research and work. But they talk a lot about this idea of how you build a culture. And a lot of it is in whose stories are we telling? So who gets set up as at this institution as a hero, right? I think we talk a lot about Boone Pickens, for instance, right? We have heroed and lionized this individual, which there's real tremendous benefit for. And Boone has definitely helped the institution come a long way. But what's that message about what it takes to be significant at the institution, right? What we're saying is, you too can be significant to OSU once you make billions of dollars and give them to us. You will be significant to this institution, right? So I think about whose stories are we telling? Who are the heroes of this place in big stories and small stories? And can students see themselves in those stories? Do they see those heroes as people that they can aspire to be? Shared experiences obviously go a long way towards sense of belonging. You know, I came to this work through the summer camp world. I tell you, there's something about having survived a whitewater rafting trip with 6 other people that automatically bonds you, right? These shared experiences that you have to look back on and to go back to and draw on. What are these shared experiences that we have with our students? And I think for students in particular, so many times we just go through events and we may have this experience, but we don't give students the space to process it as a significant shared experience, right? Like, yeah, that whitewater rafting trip was a lot of fun. But what happened on that? What are the stories that got told? And how do we circle back and reflect on this as something that we had together that we can draw on to give us this base of relationship and history to build this sense of belonging through? So I think this is our role in higher education. Students are going to have these experiences. We get to come on and elevate those experiences to something that's very special and transformational for students, using reflection, using great question asking to help students see these things as their development of belonging. Repetition, right? These things that I know are going to happen every week, every semester, every year, these things that I have to look forward to, that I can sort of rely on, they become for students and for us this sort of like default. Like, I know what to expect. I know what's going to happen when I walk into Boone Pickens Stadium to watch a football game, right? I know what the paddle people are going to do. I know what Bullet is going to do. Like, I know this because I've seen it. I feel a part of this community because I know what to expect, because I've been there, I've seen it, and I have experienced it. So sort of having this repetition helps folks really find that sense of belonging that they can expect to be a part of that. And then I think for an institution, it's also important to think about where we belong. Kayla at the end is going to talk a little bit more about physical space. But when we ask students, where do you feel like you belong? They're not going to say necessarily, I feel like I belong at OSU on this massive campus. They're going to say, I feel like I belong in 250 in the student union because that's where I spend most of my time. I feel like I belong in the Chick-fil-A line because that's where I spend most of my time. Or in the library, right? Like, we have such an opportunity through sense of place to have students have a place where they feel comfortable. That's kind of all of the work that goes into building a student union, all of the theory behind student unions and why spaces like this are so important, because the role of physical space in creating belonging for students, a place where they feel comfortable, where they feel seen, is huge. It's massively important. And so our physical spaces, our offices, have a really significant role to play in helping students feel like they have an actual place to go where they belong. So I want to ask you all to do a little bit of reflection. We talked about reflection. What I would like for you to do is share with us times that you have felt like you belong. So if you will go to this website, menti.com, pull out your phones, go to menti.com, and you can enter this code right here, and just share with us. Think about a time in your life or a place, an experience where you really felt like you belong. Why? What was it about that experience, that moment, that place that made you feel like I belong here? And if you will just, and these can be anonymous. I mean, you can write your name if you want, but feel free to just kind of anonymously share what was about that space and experience made you feel like you belong. Friends? Yeah. Family? Absolutely. Oh, I love this one, but to both of these actually. People texted to see if I was coming, right? Just this whole personal touch of, hey, are you going to be here? That matters. When you walk into a place and somebody knows your name, feel like your voice was heard. Shared laughs, I love that. Being invited to participate, shared goals, common goals, that your contributions are recognized. The ability to be your authentic self, to feel like I don't have to filter, I don't have to code switch, I don't have to be somebody different than who I am in this space, goes a long way towards that belonging. Others take time to listen to you, welcoming you intentionally, making you feel known, connections you made. I love this as a physical space. My sorority has a physical space, but it's about what happened within those walls, right? Sisters, roommates, community dinners, and parties. Cards and hard times, messages, shared experiences. They accept me for who I was. Being greeted in the morning, follow-up contacts, academic sameness. That Kayla talked about that earlier, right? This idea of this commonality, right? I saw someone who looked like me, hugely important. Ownership of space. Someone cared enough to ask about life events. Right, so what I love about, thank you for sharing these, and this is exciting to see because, we're talking about this at this super high level, right? Sense of belonging is this academic construct. And that sounds really, it's something we're going to work towards, something we're going to strive for, this big deal. It is not a hard thing to ask somebody how they're feeling anymore, right? Like, we can just distill this into such clear and simple things that make our folks feel like they belong. Somebody cared enough to ask about life events, asking how I feel, right? It moves this from this big construct to this very specific, simple, actionable things to make people, to demonstrate to people how they belong. One of the things that I think is really important, we talk about, Roberta and I and Chad do this class with human resources on using student employment as a developmental tool, and how we build belonging through student employment. One of the best things that happens in student employment is when a student doesn't show up for their shift, and somebody takes the time to say, hey, you didn't show up, where were you? Just noticing that they weren't there is a demonstration of sense of belonging, right? You weren't there, we missed you, we noticed, right? Something that simple goes so far to demonstrate to a student how much they belong. So let's talk a little bit about now who might not feel like they belong and what might cause a student to not feel like they belong on this campus, in an office, in an environment. Some of you have heard me say this before. This is my soapbox that I'm going to stand on until somebody pushes me off of it. We are an institution whose mascot is an old white man with a shotgun. And that's significant, right? There's meaning to that, there's relevance to that, but that also sends a message about who might belong on this campus and why. This sends a message about what you might have to do or look like or value or think in order to belong at this place. Now, this is not a right or wrong question, right? This is not a, well, that's not what we value at OSU. Again, sense of belonging is about perception. It's about feeling. It's about somebody looking across the crowd and saying, is somebody like me valued in a place like this? And what are the pieces of evidence that I can point to say either yes or no? What are the pieces of evidence I can point to as an individual to say, yes, I feel valued in this space? Or no, I do not feel valued, I do not feel like I belong in this space. There was some work that was done about 10 years ago now at the University of Texas. And they looked at, which I'm sorry, I should not reference University of Texas, but it's still good work, notwithstanding. They looked at students, first generation students, first in their family to go to college, as they were transitioning in and what was happening with them in their mindset to kind of help them understand, were they going to stick around or not? And what they found was for a lot of first generation students, they were coming to campus already with the mindset of college is not for people like me. This place is not for somebody like me. And what they would do was they would find experiences to confirm that. So they're gonna walk in thinking this place is not for me. And as soon as they maybe don't do so well on a quiz or a test, that's confirmation of that, right? Or as soon as they try to join an organization and get rejected, that's confirmation of that. So it's so easy for so many of our students to walk through this door, look at what the typical OSU student is, what they think the typical OSU student is, or what they do, or who they are, and look for things to confirm that they are not that, and then automatically remove themselves from that situation. And so I think for those of us who work with students, that's so important, because it's so easy, it's so simple to provide a space for a student to feel like they belong. But it's also so simple for a student to have an experience that confirms for them that they don't belong. And I think that that's why the work that we do really matters in helping students cultivate that sense of belonging. So a few things around language. The language that we do obviously matters for students in helping to communicate to them you belong or you don't belong. First of all, is around setting expectations. And so this was, Kayla gets to talk about her dissertation. This was my dissertation, was on expectations for students, how students felt like they were going to navigate the college environment. And it was so important for students as they were transitioning into college that somebody said to them, I expect you to graduate. This is basically, that's the essence of my dissertation. That language, I expect you to graduate, is what carried them through to graduation. Because what happened was that changed that message for students in their minds. They no longer went to, I automatically feel like I don't belong, I'm gonna look for things to confirm that. That message shifted to, somebody important to me has said that I am somebody who is capable of graduating from college. I'm gonna look for experiences to confirm that. Does that make sense? That difference? And so when we're talking with students, this language that we use around expectations, what we expect of them as part of the Cowboy family, what we expect of them in their working with others, even again, expecting them to show up, communicates to a student, I see you, I value you, when you are not here, I miss you. And then communicating to students again that they belong. We can't say to a student again, you belong. What we can say is, how is your day going? Tell me about your family. I know this was a really difficult weekend for you. Tell me how you're feeling, right? What you're doing in that is communicating belonging without using the language, you belong, right? Here's my next soapbox that I've started using a lot. And it's my favorite acronym, my new favorite acronym, PDUA, and it stands for this. Please don't use acronyms. Thank you. I'm pretty proud of it, actually. And here's why. An acronym automatically takes somebody out of belonging. Acronyms make no sense on their own. They are a collection of letters that have no actual meaning. And so for a student who already automatically feels like I don't fit here, like everybody else has this secret knowledge that I don't have, acronyms are going to be part of it. Yeah, everybody else knows what that stands for. I don't, therefore they belong and I don't, right? It's that secret, it's that insider knowledge that I don't have. You all know this. We work at an institution where automatically language is confusing. We have a bursar's office. We have a registrar's office. Those are not real words.
I'm offended.
I'm sorry. I told the group yesterday, like, I know what a bursar does. I don't know what a bursar means, you know.
I mean business.
Well, that's true, that's fair. But again, right, like, there's all of this already insider lingo for students, these insider things that you have to know to be successful. When an R is on your class schedule, it means you go to that class on Thursday. That doesn't mean anything, right? That's not logical. That's not easily identifiable apparent. And so we're already providing this insider lingo, you have to have the secret knowledge to belong here. When we add an extra layer of acronyms on top of that just further removes us. Particularly at an institution as big and large and complex as this, we have acronyms that are the same acronym and mean completely different programs and things, right? How much more confusing is that for students? And so, again, that's my second soapbox. I think that's my last soapbox for the day, but who knows? We'll see where that goes. And then when I did training with student leaders, I did a lot around This is some Disney lingo, so Kevin's here. He can talk about this, but Disney is famous for talking about on stage versus off stage, right? You never, if you go to a Disney park, you never see Cinderella smoking a cigarette on her break, right? For lots of reasons. It's a really fun mental image that we can play with. But they are famous for having this network of underground tunnels where their cast members can get to any spot in the park unseen and unknown. And that preserves the Disney magic, right? One of the things that I used to tell student leaders when I was training orientation staff and camp staff was you never know who's looking at you. And you may not be interacting with a student, you may not be directly interacting with somebody, but that doesn't mean that they're not watching you and they're making assumptions about whether or not they belong based on how they see you interact with somebody else. So let's say that you have had an interaction with a student and maybe it didn't go well. Like maybe that student just really drove you crazy. And that student has walked away and you turn to the person next to you and you tell them the story of how that student just drove you crazy. Which is, for those of us who work with students, which is all of us, we need that time to vent, right? Like, these are difficult, stressful jobs. But if another student sees you do that, they're going to make assumptions about whether or not they belong based on how they see you address that situation with somebody else. And so always being cognizant of where are our safe spaces with each other, where we can vent about things, where we can talk about issues that we're having, but aren't spaces where somebody else is going to see and are going to make assumptions about whether or not they belong. It's those smallest interactions with a student can be the thing that shapes their entire experience. So if you've heard me tell this story before, but I say it all the time because it's so meaningful. In my previous institution, we had a young woman who was very seriously contemplating suicide. And what interrupted that, what got her, the person who got her the help that she needed, was the janitor in her residence hall, who said to her, "I see you every morning, and something is off. What is it?" And that conversation with somebody that we tend to assume doesn't have those conversations with students was all that it took to give the students the help that she needs. What an incredibly powerful message for belonging, right? Somebody who says to this student, "I see you, I know you, what's happening?" went such a long way. And so all of us have this incredibly powerful role to play to help students feel like they belong and provide that connection for them. So we talk a lot about just sort of belonging as a construct. Talk about a little bit about how we build belonging. We've got two sets of questions. I'm going to walk you through some questions you might work with a student as they're trying to build their own belonging. And then Kayla is going to walk you through some questions you might ask yourselves and ask each other as you're trying to create an environment of belonging. So first of all, as you are talking to a student about building their own belonging, one of the first things to do is help that student understand, first of all, who they are. You can't really find out where you belong until you really know who you are as an individual. So what do you value? What's important to you? I also love asking questions that are just fun for students, right? So many of the questions that we find ourselves in these conversations with students we feel like they have to be so weighty, right? Like, what's your deep purpose in life? What's the legacy, which is literally a question I put on here, right? And these are important questions. But when we're talking about belonging, it's okay to just acknowledge that, hey, if you have fun with people, you feel like you belong, right? So asking them, what do you do for fun? How do you find a way to have fun with other people and to build that environment that way? Aspirations helps get at some of that identity as well. So asking a student, have you seen somebody that you want to be like on this campus? Is there somebody that you identify with that you feel like you can be them in a couple of years, or you would like to be them in a couple of years? Helping students see that path between where they are now and where they want to be, sometimes providing a tangible role model is a really helpful way for students to be able to do that, because they get this idea of, well, if they did it, then so can I. And as the staff and faculty, what we get to do is help students say, yeah, they did it, and here are all of the things it took for them to get there, right? Like, yes, you as a first-year student, you see this person who's a senior, they look like they have it all together. For those of us who have ever had a conversation with a senior, most of them don't feel like they have it all together, right? But for new students, they perceive that they do. And so we get to help students understand what it took for those students to get there. And then what's legacy you'd like to leave behind? And then finally, one of the things that I have found to be very, very valuable in helping students understand this idea of belonging, helping them find their own sense of belonging, is asking them not to concentrate on their own belonging, but how do you make somebody else feel like they belong? So some of the folks that I know who I would say have the sense of belonging down the most, really feel like they have created a space, are not focused on their own belonging, but they're focused on creating others, belonging for others. What happens then is, in creating that belonging for others, right, their sense of mattering shoots up, right? Their sense of significance and impact shoots up because they have found their purpose. And that purpose is creating that belonging for others. And so that can be extraordinarily powerful for students, helping them create their own belonging. And Michaela is going to guide us through some questions that we can ask ourselves to create environments of belonging.
So this slide isn't questions I'm asking for my dissertation. This actually, when I created these questions, I was thinking more about my job here in the Student Union. So if you're not familiar with what I do here on campus, I am the manager for Arts, Culture, and Entertainment. So I advise the Student Arts Alliance, and we do art-based programming for all students, no matter if they're good or bad at art. And I also am the director for the Miss Oklahoma State University Scholarship Competition, and then we do some special events like our Summer on the Plaza series, Fanfare of Lights, which is our annual Christmas lighting ceremony on campus, etc. So a lot of folks, I think, when they look at my job, they're like, you do arts and crafts, run a beauty pageant, some might argue, and throw parties. Like, that's what your job is. Which, when I was a student, that's probably what got me interested in joining this organization. Is like, oh, I want to do the fun stuff. But I know through my work that I do so much more than that. Like, I think about belonging constantly, and the things that I do are because I want students to feel like they belong here through these fun arts and crafts parties. But these are some of the questions that I've either asked myself, or maybe I didn't consciously think about it, but now reflecting on it, I'm like, oh, that's what I was thinking about. So if I was going to advise somebody else, like, how did you make that happen? These are the questions I would probably ask them. So thinking about the physical space, so is your office and our student workspace inviting? So there are a few folks in here who do share Student Union 250 with us. And when we first moved up there, we had to have the conversation of like, how do we function together? You operate differently in your office space than I do mine. And you definitely need to like make sure your office space functions the way that it needs to, depending on what your work is. But the question was posed to me, well, this is an office space, this isn't a student's living room. And I don't know about you, but if a bunch of people kept coming into my living room and like sitting down and eating lunch with me, I would be personally really annoyed. So I didn't see it as a living room, but I understood where that person was coming from. But it's always been really important to us in the arts, culture, and entertainment that our office space is kind of this, we're building the space where they feel like they belong. We're giving them somewhere to eat lunch. We're giving them someone where they can work and to a certain degree play together, although we do have more rules than maybe a hangout room would have. So thinking about that, maybe it's the colors that are in your office. We have orange furniture in our office because that's our colors here. And so is your office kind of speaking that language of this is OSU, this is what we do here, these are part of our traditions? Or is it drab, it's cold, is it easy to talk in this space? So kind of thinking about your physical space. Dialogues, I think a lot about the meetings that we have with students. So are students able to share their personal perspectives? So maybe you've done a really great job of recruiting diverse students to be in your organization. You've got them in leadership roles. They're now sitting around this executive board. Are they actually able and comfortable to share that personal perspective you were seeking to add to the table? Or are they still expected to kind of speak the same language that's always been going on or have that similar conversation? So I think that's really important as you can get them there, but are they actually asked for the personal perspective? And then also, does their input result in direct, relatable action? So you ask for their input, what do you think? They gave you some ideas, they told you what it was like. Did you actually do anything about it, or did you just ask them and then move on and say, well, I asked them, but You know, so make sure that if you're asking for this input, these perspectives, there are actions that happen after it. I think a lot about, my brain's not working. Is it OK State staying united? Yes, I think a lot about that organization. I think they've had a lot of conversations. A lot of people are asking for input. Do we see actions come from that? And I think that's what they talk about a lot is, we've talked to you about this, we've given you input, we've even given you solutions. Like, where's the action? So I think that can go a long way for belonging. Like, that's what they are asking for. They're like, we want to belong here. Here's how you help us belong here. Opportunities. Is there something for everyone in your student orgs, roles, and et cetera? I think a lot about our students who are kind of resume builders. I think a lot about like the recognition we give to seniors of significance or top 10 freshmen. They're these people who can pack these resumes, but do they need to? Like, is there any like need for having this really extensive resume where they did 15 things, and like, could we, I guess, in a sense, spread the wealth and give more students these opportunities to have a role, that kind of thing. But then also, as we're building new programs, are we making sure to invite students who aren't involved in other things to be part, or are we looking to our already student leaders to kind of take on another task to add to their list? So I think about that a lot as well. And then going back to the definitions, are students indispensable to your programs? If the students went away, would the program look the same? Like, are you doing enough of the work for your students to where if they weren't here that it would just be functioning in the same way? So we need to make sure they're indispensable. If they weren't here, our program wouldn't operate. I mean, if there were literally 0 students, I don't think we'd have jobs, but you know, like, I think a lot about our events, you know. If the students were here, would we still be doing bingo? We might. So how do we make sure that the student is the indispensable piece of making that bingo night or whatever the program is happen? And then I think a lot about our staff. So are there a variety of identities on your staff? We talked a lot, and we even saw in responses from you guys, I saw someone that looked like me or that I could identify with. So do we have that on our staff? And if not, how do we do better recruiting? How do we figure out what that looks like so that our students see more of themselves in our staff makeup? And then I think hopefully a warm fuzzy to kind of lead you guys on, but is our staff supported? So if you are in a supervisor role, do your staff feel like they belong here? Because if they don't, they're not going to be able to help students feel like they belong. So your staff also has to feel like they belong here. And I think that can make like such a huge difference is if you feel like your staff, or you make your staff feel like they belong, then they're going to help students feel like they belong. It's kind of like this trickle-down effect. So, yeah, those are my last thoughts. Do we want to open it up for questions?
Yeah, we have a few minutes left for questions. Also, if you have not had a chance to sign in yet, I'm going to keep talking about this. Please scan this QR code or go to this URL and sign in just so we know who's here today. But as we're doing that, please let us know any questions you might have.
Yes.
Do you have your assessment already built? Like, can we see it? Can we see a copy of it, the questions?
So it will be doing the 10 words question as my first phase. And so essentially, there's a few more demographic questions in my version of it, but essentially I'm doing that one that I've talked about with the Leadership at Campus Life pilot study. And then I'll be using the results of that to develop my measurement instruments. So I do not have, that's my second phase, so I don't have that one that I can show you yet. I was telling John Mark before we got in here, the thing I'm most nervous about is it being a really good instrument, and then I have to name it. I don't know what to name it. Like, that sounds so scary to me. So,
I recommended the Loper scale.
You know?
He said no.
I don't know. So, no, I don't have it yet, but I'm hoping to have it probably around Christmas time. But my dissertation, I guess if folks are interested, I will be collecting a sample from Oklahoma State University, Texas Christian University, University of Arkansas, and Louisiana State University. So it should be really interesting comparable data at a lot of, I intentionally picked 2 Big 12 schools and 2 SEC schools, none of them OU or Texas. So. But yeah, I just started, so I'm really excited.
I don't know that you would have any data that shows this, but have you discovered that the idea of belonging has changed as the generation of students has come through the university?
I'd say in my literature, there might be some out there and the differences between like millennials and Gen Z, etc. But one thing I tried to find really hard was information about the difference of belonging with the improvements, I guess, in technology, just like this increase in social media, etc., which I think kind of has generational. And I could not find a single thing. So I think it would be a very interesting research topic for sure. But I don't have that included in my lit review, so I can't speak to it. But the basic generational differences might be out there.
I think one thing that I am seeing a lot more is, it's not just in belonging, but it's sort of in all of those, really those bottom three Maslow categories, is this acknowledgement that those have to be met in order for those higher level things. And I think we're talking about that in ways that we haven't, as an institution, right? There are folks who have always been doing that work, but I think it's elevated as part of the conversation in ways that it hasn't been before.
Just thinking about the technology and social media and generational, one of the responses to the Menti was group text. And when I saw that pop up on the screen, I literally had an emotional reaction because I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with students. They're like, well, I don't know because I'm not on that group text. Like, it is a big deal that they're excluded. It may just be that nobody had their number, or it was inadvertent, or it was a fat finger typing, but man, people get emotional about the fact that they are not in a specific group text. And that, when she said that, that made me think of that too, just because I've been on both sides of that conversation a lot more than I ever thought I would be.
That is so real. My husband is the oldest of 7, and they have a boys group chat where they talk about sports all the time. And he'll always be over there like, oh, I'm talking to the boys. And I, to this day, am terrified that there's a girls' chat I'm not in. I've asked. But I'm like, is there a girl, do the women in this room, do we talk? I don't know. But I still have that fear, even though I've asked multiple times. So they claim there's not one.
This is fascinating. You're right. I mean, and it's this calculation that goes through somebody's mind of, what do I post to what group and why? This is for this group, this is for this group.
And then when you get something that was meant for a different group and you're like, well, how come I didn't know about that?
Yeah.
I'm not even in that group and now I'm offended.
That's
With our
a
kids.
whole other research project that I think is really fascinating. Yeah.
You mentioned something about top 10 seniors and anyway, I just think we have a hard time here recognizing the average student.
Yeah.
And I think we make such a huge deal about these outstanding students. I know we do it in our office because you're so impressed by them and so odd, but I feel like those average B students that are still, involved, but maybe not in every single thing in campus, we don't do a great job at embracing them and saying, hey. And so I think we lose some of them. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
I do agree. I actually had kind of a personal dilemma the other day when they sent out, those nominations for seniors of significance through alumni. And I have a really small group of students right now, but I have one senior. I was like, she is awesome. I want to nominate her, but they have to have been involved in 3 organizations. And so then I was like, well, what counts? I'm not sure. But she's involved very heavily in 2. And I was like, can I not nominate her? Her work has still been significant. But then I also know that she had her first 2 years of college, she had a severe sleeping disorder. And so she hardly could even go to class. And then she figured it out, and now she's gotten really involved. But it's hard, do we hold that against them, that they had a health issue? I don't know. But
Yeah, you should be celebrating that she's gonna
yeah, exactly. Can that be her 3rd organization? Is she how to handle her sleeping disorder?
Medical anomaly.
Because to me, that's amazing.
Yeah, and that goes back to those hero stories, right? Whose stories are we telling and why? I think.
Yeah.
I think the flip side of that too is a lot of students that are super high achieving aren't necessarily well.
Yes.
They're focused in certain areas and excelling, but they may not be taking care of their basic needs.
Yep.
I was wondering too, with your top of your 10 responses, you had a very specific group of students that you're asking.
Yeah.
So maybe they're so invested in their extracurriculars that top classroom isn't quite as important for them. But if we went and looked at students that are making all A's, but they focus on their classroom experience, what would their responses look like?
Yeah, I do think that's a bias that should be mentioned, is that this was sent out to leaders and leadership in campus life. And so even the fact that it came from me, that they may be thinking about me in my room. So I do know that I'm hoping in my dissertation that the classroom will come up more often. But yes, I mean, some students, all they do is research and, you know, with professors, so I do think there's the potential they report differently.
Well, it's 11 o'clock, so thank you all for being here with us.